Crack this code and I'll marry you. The words hung in the air like poison. 20 executives watched as Anita Brooks, the youngest CEO in Nexus Tech's history, smiled cruelly at the janitor standing in her conference room doorway. The laughter that followed was sharp, cutting, designed to humiliate. But Elliot Rickward didn't laugh. He simply nodded once and walked toward the keyboard. What happened in the next 20 minutes would change everything. Before we continue, please tell us, where in the world are you tuning in from? We love seeing how far our stories travel. The emergency lights cast red shadows across the conference room. On the main screen, lines of code scrolled past like a death sentence. 60% of Nexus Tech's client databases already encrypted, billions of dollars evaporating by the second. 4 hours, Randall stammered, his shirt soaked with sweat. That's all we have left before we lose everything. Anita Brooks stood at the head of the table, her designer heels clicking against marble as she paced. At 28, she'd clawed her way to the top by being smarter and more ruthless than everyone around her. She'd sacrificed everything for this company. And now, it was burning.
"What about external consultants?" she demanded. "Already here." Randall gestured helplessly at the 20 cybersecurity experts crowded around laptops. "Best in the country. They've tried everything. Firewalls, backdoors, brute force decryption. This ransomware is too sophisticated. It's learning from every defense we throw at it." "Then we're finished." Anita's voice was cold, but her hands trembled against the table edge. That's when the door opened. Elliot stood in the doorway, his janitor's uniform wrinkled, his hands still damp from cleaning the executive bathroom. He'd been emptying trash bins on this floor when he'd heard the shouting, seen the panic through the glass walls, noticed the code scrolling across the monitors. He'd recognized the attack pattern immediately. It was elegant, almost beautiful in its complexity. Whoever designed it understood systems the way poets understood language, the way musicians understood rhythm. He'd told himself to walk away, to keep his head down, to stay invisible. But then he'd thought about Nathan asking, "Daddy, why are you always sad?" And he'd realized that hiding from who he was hadn't healed anything. It had just frozen him in place, trapped in a moment 5 years past. "Excuse me," he said softly, his voice barely carrying across the room. "I think I might be able to help." 20 pairs of eyes turned toward him. Most registered confusion, a few showed irritation at the interruption. Anita's showed pure contempt. "Security," she snapped, her voice sharp as broken glass. "Get him out of here, now." "Wait," Elliot said, stepping forward before the guards could reach him. His voice was still quiet, but something in it made people pause, a certainty that didn't match his appearance. "That's a polymorphic ransomware variant with quantum-resistant encryption layers. It's using a distributed botnet architecture to continuously evolve its attack vectors in real time. Your team is trying to fight it like it's static code, but it's learning from every defense you throw at it. That's why nothing's working." The room went completely silent. Randall blinked, his mouth slightly open. "How could you possibly know?" "The signature pattern," Elliot continued, his eyes fixed on the code still visible on the main monitor. "It's using a modified Fibonacci sequence for its encryption keys, which means it's regenerating faster than standard decryption can process. You'd need to predict the sequence evolution and build a counter algorithm that thinks 3 steps ahead." One of the cybersecurity experts, a woman with sharp features and sharper instincts, leaned forward. "That's actually accurate. How does a janitor?" "Let me try," Elliot said, looking directly at Anita. His expression was calm, almost resigned. "What have you got to lose?" Anita studied him with the cold calculation that had made her a CEO before 30. She saw a janitor, someone invisible, someone beneath notice, someone who'd probably watched too many hacker movies and thought he understood technology. She saw someone who was wasting her time. But she also saw the clock ticking toward midnight, toward catastrophe, toward the destruction of everything she'd built. A cruel smile touched her lips. "Fine. Crack this code," she paused, letting the absurdity hang in the air like poison, "and I'll marry you." Several executives exchanged glances. One whispered something that made others snicker. It was meant to humiliate him, to put him in his place before security dragged him back to whatever closet he'd crawled out of. Elliot didn't laugh. He didn't flinch. He simply nodded once and walked to the nearest terminal. 20 minutes, he said quietly. That's all I need. His fingers touched the keyboard, and 5 years of silence shattered like glass. Cypher Ghost had returned. What happened next would be discussed in cybersecurity circles for years, analyzed in case studies, and taught in advanced computer science courses as an example of genius in action. Elliot's hands moved across the keys like a concert pianist, rediscovering a long-abandoned instrument. He didn't type commands, he conducted them, orchestrating a digital symphony that rewrote reality in real time. His fingers never hesitated, never second-guessed. Every keystroke was precise, purposeful, elegant. He didn't fight the ransomware, he seduced it. The experts watched in stunned silence as he reverse-engineered the encryption algorithm in real time, his code appearing on screen faster than most of them could read. Within 8 minutes, he'd mapped the entire botnet infrastructure. Within 12, he'd identified the master server's location and isolated its command protocols. Within 15, he'd built a counter-algorithm that didn't just stop the attack, it turned it back on itself, forcing the ransomware to decrypt its own encryption. By minute 18, every database had been recovered, every file restored, every system stabilized. But Elliot didn't stop there. In the final 2 minutes, he rebuilt their entire security infrastructure from the ground up, implementing defenses so sophisticated that several of the watching experts would later admit they didn't fully understand how they worked. He closed vulnerabilities the company hadn't even known existed. He created adaptive firewalls that would learn and evolve with future threats. When Elliot finally leaned back from the terminal, the main monitor displayed a simple message in green text. Threat neutralized, all systems secure, infrastructure upgraded.
The conference room was absolutely silent. Anita stood frozen 5 feet behind him, her face pale, her carefully constructed composure completely shattered. "Who are you?" Elliot stood slowly, adjusting his janitor's cap with hands that were perfectly steady. His eyes met hers for just a moment. And in that moment, she saw something that terrified her more than the cyber attack had. Not anger at her mockery, not pride in his accomplishment, not expectation of gratitude or recognition. Just emptiness. A profound, aching hollowness. A man who'd saved the world but couldn't save what mattered. A man who just performed a miracle and felt nothing. "Your company's secure," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "You should change your administrative passwords. They're embarrassingly weak for a company of this size. Also, your employee database has a back-end vulnerability that someone could exploit. I patched it, but you should have your team review the fix." He turned to leave. "Wait," Anita said, her voice cracking slightly. "You can't just... Who are you?" Elliot paused at the door, his hand on the frame. He didn't turn around. "Just a janitor who got lucky. Good night, Miss Brooks." Then he walked out, leaving his cleaning cart behind. Have you ever been underestimated by someone who couldn't see past your job title? Drop a comment below. Elliot didn't return to Nexus Tech the next morning. He called HR, cited personal reasons, and ignored the 17 voicemails begging him to come back. Instead, he picked up Nathan from kindergarten. "Daddy!" His 5-year-old son ran toward him, backpack bouncing. "Look what I made!" Nathan thrust a crumpled drawing into his hands, crayon figures labeled "Me" and "Daddy" standing beneath a crooked sun. "It's perfect, buddy." Elliot knelt down, pulling Nathan close. For a moment, the memory of the conference room faded. This is what mattered, this small person who asked innocent questions that broke his heart in new ways every day. "Daddy, why don't I have a mommy like the other kids?" The question came while they walked to the car, Nathan's small hand in his. Elliot's chest tightened the way it always did. "You do have a mommy," he said gently. "She's watching over you from somewhere special. She loved you so much that she made sure you got here safe. Is she coming back?" "Nobody. But she's always with you." "Okay." Nathan accepted this the way children accept mysteries they don't yet understand. "Can we get ice cream?" Elliot smiled despite the ache in his chest. Later that night, after Nathan had fallen asleep clutching a stuffed dinosaur, Elliot sat alone in their small apartment. The one bedroom wasn't much, but it was theirs. Clean, quiet, safe. He'd chosen this life deliberately 5 years ago, chosen invisibility over recognition, penance over power. But tonight, something had shifted. When his fingers had touched that keyboard, when the code had responded to him like an old language he'd never quite forgotten, he'd felt something he hadn't felt in years. Alive. Not healed, not whole, but alive. He looked at the framed photo on the shelf, his wife, radiant and laughing, taken 3 weeks before Nathan was born, before the emergency, before the choice he'd made that haunted him still. "I'm sorry," he whispered to the photograph. "I'm so sorry." The photo didn't answer. It never did. 72 hours after the conference room incident, Anita Brooks sat in her office staring at a file that shouldn't exist. She'd assembled her top investigators, former FBI cybercrime specialists, private intelligence analysts, data forensics experts. She'd given them one directive: find out who that janitor really is.
It had taken 3 days of intensive digital archaeology. The name Elliot Rickwood was real, legal, documented, verifiable, but it was only 5 years old. Before that, the man simply didn't exist. So they'd look differently, not at who he was, but at who had disappeared when he appeared. They'd cross-referenced his technical capabilities with known experts who'd vanished. They'd analyzed his coding style, his methodology, his architectural approach. And they'd found him. "Cipher Ghost," Anita whispered, reading the file for the 3rd time. The janitor who'd saved her company in 20 minutes was Cipher Ghost, the legend, the phantom, the myth. The man who'd built security systems for governments, who'd stopped cyber-terrorist attacks, who'd been offered positions at every major tech company in the world and turned them all down. The man who disappeared 5 years ago after his wife died in childbirth while he was saving the Eastern Seaboard's power grid. The man who'd been punishing himself ever since by living as nobody, working as a janitor, raising his son alone.
She'd mocked him, humiliated him publicly, made a cruel joke about marriage to someone who'd lost his wife while saving millions of lives. She'd seen a janitor and assumed he was nobody. She'd been so catastrophically wrong. Anita closed the file and stared at her reflection in the darkened window. The woman looking back was successful, powerful, untouchable, and completely alone. When had she become this person? When had she stopped seeing people as human and started seeing them as positions, as obstacles, as tools? She thought about her parents, who'd stopped calling, her friends who'd stopped inviting her, the relationships she'd sacrificed for quarterly earnings and board meetings. She'd climbed to the top by becoming invincible. And Elliot Rickwood had walked away from being a legend to be present for his son's bedtime. Anita found him 3 days later at Riverside Park. She'd expected resistance, maybe security concerns. Instead, the address had been easy to find, a modest apartment in a working-class neighborhood, the kind of place she'd lived in during college before ambition had consumed everything else. She spotted him on a bench near the playground. Nathan was on the swings. Elliot watched his son with an expression that made Anita's throat tighten. Love mixed with sorrow, presence shadowed by absence. The boy's laughter cut through the autumn air like music, pure and unself-conscious, and for the first time, Anita saw Elliot smile. It was small, fragile, weighted with sorrow, but real. She approached slowly, uncertain, a feeling she'd spent her entire adult life learning to eliminate. "I know who you are," she said finally. "Cipher Ghost." Elliot's expression didn't change. He kept watching Nathan climb the jungle gym with fearless determination. "That person doesn't exist anymore." "Neither does the woman who mocked you in that conference room," she said quietly. "Or at least, I don't want her to." They sat in silence for a long moment. A breeze rustled the autumn leaves, carrying the scent of approaching rain. "I'm sorry," Anita continued, "for how I treated you, for the joke about marriage, for not seeing—" She stopped, struggling. "For not seeing that you were a person, that you mattered." "You didn't know," Elliot said simply. "That's not an excuse.
I built my entire life on being better than everyone else, smarter than everyone else, harder than everyone else. And in the process, I forgot how to be human. She paused. You saved my company. You saved everything I'd worked for. And I don't even know how to thank you. You don't owe me anything. I owe you more than I can possibly repay. Elliot finally turned to look at her. His eyes were kind, but exhausted. The eyes of someone who'd carried impossible weight for too long. Then do something for me. The next time someone asks for help, really asks, not just going through the motions. Don't dismiss them because of what they look like or what their job title is. People aren't their positions. They're just people. Anita felt her throat tighten. Is that why you left? Why you're not coming back? I left because I knew what would happen if I stayed. The questions, the offers, the attention. People wanting to know who I really am, where I've been, what I can do for them. I didn't save your company because I wanted recognition. I saved it because... He trailed off, watching Nathan hang upside down from the monkey bars, giggling. Because my son asked me yesterday why I'm always sad. And I realized that hiding from who I was hasn't healed anything. It's just frozen me in place. So what happens now?
Now I figure out how to be both people, Elliot said. The father Nathan needs, and the person I used to be, in some form. Not Cypher Ghost. He died 5 years ago. But maybe someone in between. Someone who can use what he knows to help people without disappearing into it. That sounds lonely, Anita said softly. It is. Elliot smiled sadly. But less lonely than it was before. Anita watched Nathan on the playground. Watched the easy joy in his movements. The fearlessness of a child who'd never known his mother, but was growing up knowing he was loved. Can I ask you something? Sure. Why did you really help? After how I treated you, you could have walked away, let the company burn. Why save someone who'd been so cruel? Elliot was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Because 5 years ago, I made a choice. I chose my work over my wife. I told myself it was important, that I was saving lives, that I'd make it in time, and I was wrong. She died thinking I'd chosen duty over her. He paused, his hands clenched on his knees. I can't change that. I can't bring her back, but I can choose differently now. I can choose to help when I'm able. I can choose to be present when it matters. Not because I'm trying to atone. You can't atone for some things, but because it's the only way forward I know. Anita felt tears in her eyes, the first she'd cried in years. You're not a bad person. You know that, right? What happened to your wife, that wasn't your fault. Maybe, but knowing that and feeling it are different things.
Nathan ran over then, breathless and beaming. Daddy, I made it all the way across without falling. I saw, buddy. Elliot's expression transformed into something warm and genuine. You were amazing. Nathan noticed Anita and studied her with frank childhood curiosity. Are you my daddy's friend? Anita looked at Elliot, who gave a small nod of permission. I'd like to be, she said to Nathan, if that's okay with you. Nathan considered this with the seriousness only 5-year-olds can muster. Okay, but you have to like dinosaurs. That's the rule. I love dinosaurs, Anita said, surprised by how easily the words came. Good, Nathan declared, then ran back toward the playground. Elliot stood slowly. I should get him home. Bath time, then dinner, then the nightly negotiation over whether vegetables are actually poison. Can I call you sometime? Anita asked carefully. Not about work, just to talk. Elliot looked at her for a long moment. Anita felt like she was being evaluated in ways that had nothing to do with business acumen or strategic thinking. Yeah, he said finally. I'd like that. He gave her his number, a simple gesture that felt monumental. As they walked away, Nathan waved enthusiastically. Anita waved back, then sat alone on the bench for a long time, watching the sunset through the trees. She'd spent her entire life measuring success by titles, salaries, and quarterly earnings.
She'd sacrificed relationships and happiness and basic human connection in pursuit of excellence. And she'd just met a man who'd walked away from being a legend to be present for his son's bath time. For the first time in her adult life, Anita Brooks wondered if she'd been calculating success with the wrong formula. If this story is hitting different, don't forget to like it. We're just getting started. 2 weeks later, Anita called on a Tuesday evening. They talked for an hour about nothing important. Nathan's obsession with space, Anita's disastrous attempt at cooking pasta, whether it would rain tomorrow. It felt strange and wonderful and completely foreign to both of them. She called again the following week, and the week after that. Slowly, over months, something neither had been looking for began to grow. Not romance, not yet, but friendship, understanding. Two people who had been lonely in different ways, learning that they didn't have to carry their weight alone.
Anita started leaving work at reasonable hours. She began eating lunch away from her desk. She learned her employees' names, really learned them, not just the ones in executive positions. She joined Elliot and Nathan at the park on weekends and discovered that watching a 5-year-old chase pigeons was more rejuvenating than any executive retreat. Elliot started consulting again, quietly, selectively, working from home so he could still be there when Nathan got off the school bus. He was careful, deliberate, taking only projects that interested him and only when they didn't interfere with his responsibilities as a father. He was rebuilding his relationship with his craft, learning that he could honor his wife's memory without destroying himself. Learning that moving forward didn't mean forgetting. It meant carrying her with him into whatever came next. Nathan drew pictures of Daddy and Miss Anita at kindergarten. Crude crayon figures holding hands beneath the yellow sun. His teacher commented that he seemed happier lately, more engaged. One evening, 6 months after that first park conversation, Nathan fell asleep on the couch between them during a movie, some animated thing about talking fish that neither adult was really watching. Anita looked at Elliot over Nathan's sleeping head and whispered, "Thank you." For what? For showing me that being powerful doesn't mean being invincible, that asking for help isn't weakness, that success isn't worth anything if you're alone at the top.
Elliot reached across Nathan and took her hand, the first time they'd touched beyond handshakes and accidental brushes. "Thank you for reminding me that I'm allowed to live again," he said quietly, "that choosing to be happy isn't a betrayal." They sat like that for a long time, connected across the sleeping child, two people learning that healing wasn't a solitary journey. 18 months after the conference room, Nathan turned 7. Anita helped plan his birthday party, a space-themed celebration involving entirely too much dry ice and a cake shaped like the solar system. She'd never planned a child's birthday party before. It was chaotic and sticky and absolutely perfect. Elliot found her in the kitchen afterward, while Nathan showed his friends his new telescope in the backyard. "You're covered in frosting," he said, smiling. "It's my new look, very avant-garde." He reached up and gently wiped blue icing from her cheek. The gesture was tender, intimate, in a way that made them both pause. "Anita," Elliot said softly, "I need to tell you something." Her heart stuttered. "Okay." "I'm not trying to replace her. Nathan's mother, my wife. What's growing between us, it's not about forgetting her or pretending she didn't exist. I know. She'll always be part of your story, part of Nathan's story. I would never want to erase that. But I think I'm ready to start writing new chapters, if you are."
Anita felt tears prick her eyes. "I've spent my whole life being certain about everything, about business, about success, about what I wanted. But with you, I'm uncertain about everything, and somehow that feels right." "Uncertainty means possibility," Elliot said. "When did you become a philosopher?" "When I started falling in love with a woman who reorganized my spice cabinet and color-coded Nathan's book collection." Anita laughed through tears. "You're in love with me? Terrifyingly so. You? Completely." They kissed then, gentle and tentative and full of promise. Outside, Nathan pointed his telescope at the sun despite repeated warnings, and his friends argued about planetary names. 24 months after that first night in the conference room, Elliot had been planning for weeks. He chose the same park bench where Anita had first revealed she knew his identity. Nathan was in on the plan, barely containing his excitement all day. They arrived at sunset, autumn air crisp with coming winter. Nathan ran ahead to check if the swings are working, with exaggerated seriousness. "What's going on?" Anita asked as they sat.
Elliot took her hand. 2 years ago, you sat here and told me you knew who I was, who I'd been, and you didn't ask me to be that person again. You just saw me, all of me, the grief and guilt and broken pieces, and you stayed anyway. Elliot, let me finish. His voice was gentle. You changed my life. Not by fixing me, I don't think I needed fixing, but by showing me I could be whole again without being the same person I was before, that I could honor my past while building a future. He slipped off the bench and knelt on one knee. From his pocket, he produced a simple ring, elegant, understated, exactly her style. Anita Brooks, will you marry me? Not because of a joke made in anger, not because of obligation, but because I love you, because Nathan loves you, because we want to build a life together, messy and imperfect and real. Anita was crying openly. Yes, absolutely yes. Nathan let out a whoop from the swings and came running. She said yes! Daddy, she said yes! They laughed and cried as the sun set. 3 people who'd been lonely in different ways, becoming a family. Later that night, after Nathan had finally fallen asleep, Elliot and Anita sat on the couch, her head on his shoulder. Do you think she would have approved? Anita asked quietly. Nathan's mother? Elliot was silent for a long moment. I think she would have loved that Nathan's happy, that I'm happy, that we found each other. She always said life was too short to waste on guilt or fear. She sounds like she was an amazing person. She was, and so are you. Different, but amazing in your own way. I'm not replacing her, Anita, but I'm not living in the past anymore either. I love you, Anita said simply. I love you too. Outside, the city hummed with life, complex, beautiful, full of patterns and possibilities. Inside, 3 people who'd been broken in different ways had found something that no algorithm could predict, no code could create, and no tragedy could completely destroy. They'd found each other, and they'd found home. 6 months later, Nathan stood as ring-bearer at their small wedding, taking his duties with profound seriousness. Anita walked down the aisle in a simple dress. No veil, no pageantry, just her, choosing him, choosing them. During the vows, Elliot spoke directly to Nathan as much to Anita. I promise to be present, to show up, to choose this family every single day. Anita knelt to Nathan's level. I promise to love your daddy, to be here for both of you, and to always, always believe in dinosaurs. Nathan grinned and hugged her so hard she nearly toppled over. That night, after the reception, after Nathan had fallen asleep in his new room in their new house, Elliot and Anita stood on the back porch watching stars emerge. No regrets? Elliot asked. Not a single one. You? Just one. She looked at him, concerned. I regret that it took almost losing everything to find this, he said, but I don't regret a single moment since. They stood together in comfortable silence. 2 people who'd learned that strength wasn't about being invincible or independent or immune to pain. Strength was about being vulnerable enough to let someone in, brave enough to heal, courageous enough to believe that after loss and grief and darkness, joy was still possible. The world would never know that Cypher Ghost had returned, fallen in love, and chosen to stay. But Elliot Rickwood, janitor, father, husband, and finally, truly, himself, knew. And that was enough. Friends, if this story touched your heart,
the way it touched mine. Please don't just watch and walk away. Hit that subscribe button and join our Soul Lift Stories family. Share this story with someone who needs to remember that their worth isn't measured by their wallet.